This in-depth tutorial is designed to give you a working knowledge of the processes required to get the column letter of a cell in Microsoft Excel. If you prefer to be simply pointed in the right direction and just get a quick rundown and a formula to copy, you might be better off checking out our quick tip on the subject by clicking on the link above. The spreadsheet used for this video is available at steveproductions.com. Follow the link at the top of the description. I'm going to start with the column function, which returns a column number rather than what we normally read, the column letter. We can, however, use this column function in combination with the address function to turn the column number into a column letter. As with any function, there are a couple of ways of inputting the column function into the active cell. If you're new to Excel, you might want to try the Insert Function button in the formula bar. Just mouse on over to this little f of x button and click on it. This opens a Functions dialog box. We'll search for the word column, hit Enter or the Go button, and our column function is at the top of the list. We'll double-click on the column result, and another box opens with a bit of information about the column function. The column function takes one argument, known as the reference. As it says here, the reference is the cell or range of contiguous cells for which you want the column number. If omitted, the cell containing the column function is used. This basically means that we can either reference the cell that we're entering the formula in or reference another cell in a different column. For our purposes here, we just want to reference the column that we're working in, so we'll leave the reference argument blank. Click OK, and we see that we get a 2 as the result. Another option is to simply type the word column into a cell. In the next column, I'll type equals, then column, followed by an open and closing parenthesis. The empty open and closing parenthesis is the same as leaving the reference box blank in the dialog box. In column C, we are given the response of 3. If we simply copy and paste the function into the next column, we get a 4 for column D. We can also click the corner of our formula in column D and drag it out to give us columns E and F, or column numbers 5 and 6. The next function I want to look at is the address function. Again, we can click on the Insert Function button. We can then search for address and select the address function. Now, as we click on the different entries in the address function dialog box, we see the information about each of the possible arguments in this function. The arguments that are bolded are required arguments. So, to start, we at the very least need the row and column numbers. For example's sake, I'm just going to enter 1 for each of these to see what happens. What we get is an absolute reference to cell A1. This is because we entered 1 for both the row and the column numbers. A, being letter number 1 in the alphabet, is column number 1. In column C, I'm going to start just by typing equals, address, and an open parenthesis. We see that the same information is available about the arguments here just by adding the formula into the cell. Since we're in column C, the third column, and row 5, I'll just type a 5 for row 5, followed by a comma, and then a 3 for column C. Close the parenthesis and press Enter, and we see that the address function is now giving us the address for the cell where the formula was entered. What happens when we copy this formula over to the next column, though? The result stays the same. That is because we simply entered numbers for the arguments of the address function. Notice, though, that the numbers generated by the column function in the row above our address functions increase by 1 for every new column. Let's go back to our second address function and simply replace the manually entered column number with a reference to the cell above it. Now, when we copy this function over, the value of the column letter changes. The problem is there is extra text that comes along with the address function that needs to be removed to leave us with just the column letter. For starters, you might be asking what the dollar signs are all about. Remember when I said that the address function gave us an absolute reference to the cell? The dollar signs before the column letter and row number are what makes this cell reference absolute. Absolute references are a subject for another video, and I'm sure that there is already plenty out there on the subject. What's important to us here is getting rid of those dollar signs, moving us one step closer to being left with only the column letter. So I'm going to copy our formula over using the click and drag method and start work on getting rid of those dollar signs, and this is done by changing both the cell and the column references to relative. Let's just highlight the cell we want to work on and click on the Insert Function button again. This reopens our dialog box so we can look at the optional arguments. The one we're looking for in particular is the one named abs_num. Let's see what Excel has to say for what abs_num means. Watch the results here, below all the arguments, as we change the absolute reference options according to Excel's description. According to this, abs_num specifies the reference type, absolute equals 1, absolute row/relative column equals 2, relative row / absolute column equals 3, and relative equals 4. So, as you can see, changing this argument to 4 makes the reference relative. We'll just leave it at 4, press OK, and see that our cell now contains no $signs, simply a reference to cell E5. I'd be lying if I said that this was the only way to get rid of these $signs. Another option is the next formula needed for the get column letter function, substitute. Let's see what Excel has to say about substitute. We'll open the insert function dialog box and type substitute. According to Excel, substitute replaces existing text with new text in a string. There are 3 bolded and therefore required arguments in the substitute function. Text is the text or reference to a cell containing text in which you want to substitute characters. So the first thing I'm going to do is simply type what is in the cell above this one, surrounded in quotes to make it a text entry, $A, $1. Our next argument is old text. Old text is the existing text you want to replace. If the case of old text does not match the case of text, substitute will not replace the text. So what were we trying to get rid of? $signs. So I'll just put a $sign here and move on. Since we're not typing in cell reference text, we don't need to surround the $sign in quotes. Excel will do that for us. Now, the new text is text you want to replace the old text with. Simple enough, we'll just leave this blank. But look, there is no result listed. That is because this entry is mandatory and we need to tell Excel something to replace the old text with. So we'll just put a double quotation mark to denote an empty string. Now we see our response is A1 without the $signs. Click OK and there is our response. Let's copy this one over and have it reference the cell above it. We'll click into our formula, highlight the text $A, $1, including the quotation marks, and press delete. We can now click on the cell above and reference that cell instead of our text. Now, as you can see, we're getting the correct column number, but we still have that 5 remaining. I'm going to copy the formula over and use another substitute to get rid of the 5. We'll just type substitute before the entirety of our original substitute formula and allow our $sign substitution to be our text argument. We can then place a comma after the original formula, and we can now use this new formula to remove the 5. So we'll just write a 5 surrounded by quotes for the old text argument, and the double quote for the blank string for the new text argument. Now, as you can see, we're getting the column letter. But you ask, what about the argument that removed the $signs? We don't need to substitute the $signs, and I'd say that you're right. In column 5, there is no need for this extra substitute function. So I'm just going to go ahead and type a new substitute function into column 5, reference the cell above it for the text argument. We're going to be substituting the old text 5 for our hand-entered row number in our address function with the new text, a double quote empty string. And now we have the column letter again. So now we can put it all together. I'm going to go ahead and copy this address function over to column 6 and make one more change. I'm going to change the row reference from 5 to 1. This is just because it's how I always write this function. So now we have the functioning address formula displaying F1. When we click into this formula, we see that it is referencing the cell above it, cell F4. As you'll recall, the number 6 from cell F4 was a result of a call to the column function. We can continue to reference this function without having to refer to another cell. We can, therefore, just copy and paste the function from F4 into our address function below it. Just activate the cell, highlight everything but the equal sign, and press Ctrl-C. Then press Escape to escape out of the cell. The cell reference text in our address function can be highlighted in the same way. Activate the cell, double-click on the F4 cell reference, then press Ctrl-V to replace the cell reference with the formula. Now the address function simply states F1, and all that's left is to get rid of that 1 and we have our column letter. I'm going to do one more copy and paste of our substitute function into column 6. As we learned above, we can simply copy and paste the formula above to replace the cell reference to cell F5. We'll highlight the address function, copy it, escape out, then paste it into the cell reference in our substitute function. One last thing to clean up, since we changed our row reference to 1, we are now replacing the number 1 rather than 5 in our substitute function. Replace the 5 with a 1 and we have our column letter. We can move this formula anywhere on any sheet and we will get the column letter as our response. This tutorial was designed to teach how to build a nested function that returns the column letter of the cell where the function is executed. This function can be saved as a named function and used in other, more complex functions that require the knowledge of the column they are being executed in. The file I used to make this video is available on our website at steveproductions.com. Simply follow the link in the description. It was our goal to make this video clear, concise, and helpful. If we failed at any of these goals, or if you have any questions about this tutorial or about related topics in Excel, please let us know in the comments. We'll help out in any way we can, even if it means making a new video. As always, thanks for watching and stay tuned.